I'd like to begin, of course, by acknowledging the traditional owners of the Swan Coastal Plain, the Noongar people, and paying our respects to their elders past and present. The John Curtin Institute of Public Policy is very pleased to be co-hosting today's Public Policy Forum with CEDA, the Committee for the Economic Development of Australia. Curtin, and particularly through the Curtin Business School, has a great cooperative relationship with CEDA, and this was proven again in the lead-up to today's event. So thank you to Liz Ritchie and her team for joining forces with us today. Our institute prides itself on bringing key national decision makers to a West Australian audience to discuss important public policy issues, and of course today's event is no exception. Later in the year we're expecting a number of other distinguished speakers, so please keep a lookout on our website or via the email. But for now though, in the interest of time, I would like to call upon the Vice-Chancellor of Curtin University, Professor Jeanette Hacket, to introduce our speaker. So Jeanette.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and I also acknowledge the Indigenous owners of the land on which we're meeting today and pay my respect to their elders past and present. I particularly acknowledge the community leaders that we have here today. I look around and see many people who are leaders in education or who are contributors and volunteers in education, so welcome. It's terrific to have you here to be able to think about such an important topic as the future of schools funding. I especially acknowledge two of my own close colleagues, Professor Kerry Cox, who's the Vice-Chancellor of Edith Cowan University, and Professor Bill Loudon, who's the Senior Deputy Vice-Chancellor at the University of Western Australia. For all of us, of course, funding of schools is a matter of great importance. We all want to ensure that every child has access to schools that are well funded and effective in developing and educating our society's future citizens and leaders, and making sure that we produce graduates and school leavers who will be future entrepreneurs, be innovators, and employers and employees. As an educational institution, Curtin University has a particular interest in the future of schools. At one level, of course, it's critical because school leavers are the largest source of students for universities. And then, of course, universities, and Curtin in particular, also prepares teachers for tomorrow. Every year at Curtin, we graduate about 180 students with degrees in early childhood, primary and secondary education, plus usually something like 45 to 50 graduate diploma students. We're also very active in science and maths education with our Science and Mathematics Education Centre, or SMEC, and it has a focus on offering postgraduate studies in science and mathematics and technology education. And this has been ongoing for 25 years and certainly has a very strong international reputation. We've over 400 students, including 300 studying at doctoral level at SMEC, and we believe it's the largest group of postgraduate students specifically in science, mathematics and technology anywhere in the world. And we've done tremendous work in places as far afield as Africa and the United States. So it's a real lamplight for that field of education. We also undertake a number of engagement activities with other educational institutions, and I'm aware that our colleague universities do similar sorts of things. For example, Curtin has a program called Curtin Link Up, and on an ongoing basis, the university works with Year 10 students, mainly from local low SES schools. We seek to lift their aspirations to come to university, and we are finding that that's producing a very significant improvement in their take-up of higher education. But our staff are also involved in other programs, including Curtin Coaches, which is a program where we send Curtin pre-service teachers into low SES schools, and they work with small groups of students, very frequently one-on-one, assisting with their learning. And there are a range of other activities for engagement. But again, all the universities in Western Australia really seek to strengthen that relationship with schools' education. This year, Curtin University also accepted its first intake of students into the Bachelor of Arts Early Education. And this is a course intending to provide an opportunity for directors and senior staff in early learning centres to upskill, and also it follows on the new COAG National Quality Agenda. So for many reasons, all of us are deeply committed to schools education. So now to our speaker today, who needs very little introduction, of course. The Honourable Peter Garrett has a very distinguished career. We would all know that he's been a very passionate advocate and campaigner on a range of contemporary Australian and global issues. And we all know he was a former member of the Australian band Midnight Oil. He's served 2 terms as President of the Australian Conservation Foundation from 1989 to 1993, and then from 1998 to 2004. He received the Australian Humanitarian Foundation Award in the environmental category in 2000, and in 2003 received the Order of Australia in the Member of the General Division for his contribution to environment and to the music industry. In 2004, he entered federal parliament when he was elected as the Labor member for Kingsford Smith. In 2007, he was appointed Minister for the Environment, Heritage and the Arts, following the election of the federal Labor government. Following the 2010 federal election, Peter was sworn in as the Minister for School Education, Early Childhood and Youth. And it's in his capacity as Minister for School Education that he's speaking with us today regarding the landmark Gonski review on school funding. Please warmly welcome the Minister.
Look, thank you to John Curtin Institute and CEDA for hosting this important event. It's a genuine pleasure to join you in Perth, to have the opportunity to outline the background and scope of the most significant Commonwealth reforms to school education for decades. And this is a period of unprecedented reform activity and debate Australia-wide. I welcome the opportunity to participate here today with many others who are speaking to you and presenting, who have significant interest and significant expertise in education policy. By the by, I was here late last year for the Commonwealth Youth Forum, which led into Choggum. They were both terrific events. I thought they showcased the city well, and certainly Western Australia's beautiful natural environment. And of course, I'm also pleased to have the opportunity to honour the work of John Curtin by speaking at an event co-hosted by the Institute named in his memory. I must say, reflecting on speaking to you today, I do feel that we continue to honour Curtin's contribution and legacy in all the work the Australian government is doing to build a society where citizens are supported to reach their potential, not only for their individual benefit, but also for the good of the community in which they live. A few months ago, I had the pleasure of awarding the National History Challenge Prize to an outstanding ACT school student, Ellen Trevanian, who wrote an exceptional analysis of John Curtin's wartime relations with the United Kingdom. So for the Institute, something to follow up on, a really good bit of young scholarship. And finally, here, it was a high point for me to be able to approve funds for the preservation of his family home in Cottesloe when I was Minister for Environment and Heritage just a few years ago. The education, both formal and informal, of John Curtin provides a useful starting point in any discussion of the importance of education and the reasons for education reform. Following an erratic education at several Catholic and state schools in Melbourne, Curtin left school at 13 and entered the world of work. Each night he'd go to the public library to read. He read to educate himself, carefully and deliberately. He read political works, poetry, novels and essays. But he didn't only read. He played cricket and football and eventually turned out as a sturdy back for Brunswick, at the same time gaining a reputation as the Labor boy orator on the Yarra Bank and at the Eastern Market. So it's a remarkable story of intellect, self-improvement and hard work. And he filled all the gaps, the education gaps, left by the poor quality of early 20th century schooling. So his is an outstanding example. And I might add, very much a Labor story. A man of working class origins rising through his own ability and capacity to eventually lead the nation at its time of greatest need. Now, I believe that people like John Curtin will always emerge through their indomitable will and the support of others. But for every John Curtin, there were many others who weren't so successful, for whom school education didn't exist or was of poor quality. Because central to the Curtin story is education, and what we describe today as a fully rounded education. Academic pursuits, sport, music, public speaking. But what Curtin provided through his own drive can't be left to chance. If we do not give every child in every school the opportunity to be the best they can be, we lose immense personal potential and national capacity. We lose tradesmen and scientists and athletes and musicians and lawyers and engineers and potential Nobel laureates and potential prime ministers even. So this government's not leaving education to chance. Until 2007, school education wasn't a national priority, and now it is. So how do we do this? How do we give every student opportunity? Well, the answer is we do it by making every school a great school. I want to reprise for you some of the arguments I made last week at the Sydney Institute. I think they bear repeating. Now, firstly, you may be aware that the Director General of the Finland Ministry of Education, Pasi Sahlberg, has recently been visiting Australia. Finland's students are among the world's top performers as measured by the OECD Program for International Student Assessment, known by its acronym PISA. Australian students also perform well in PISA with achievement above the international average in reading, maths and science, but in the past decade, our results have declined while other countries have improved. Finland has been systematically focusing on equity and quality in their education system since the 1970s. Finland also has very high university entrance requirements for studying teaching. On the other hand, the Grattan Institute, and I can see Ben Jensen's here, recently reported on, and I quote, Ben, a shift from west to east in school education performance. That's a comment that catches attention, with the Institute noting that 4 of the world's 5 highest performing systems, and doubtless you've heard this, comprise Hong Kong, Korea, Shanghai and Singapore, and in Shanghai, the average 15-year-old maths student performing at a level 2 or 3 years above his or her counterpart in Australia, the USA and Europe. Now, the successful approaches used in other countries vary, and they're often based on very different social and structural arrangements. I think it would be a mistake to try to copy overseas models that don't fit our circumstances. Still, what we can say is that our challenge is to develop a uniquely Australian education solution, applying successful international strategies to local conditions and drawing on our own expertise, knowledge and insights. In 2007, we inherited a system of different standards of curriculum, of teaching, of teacher training, of access to technology, of equity programs and of school funding. And we knew that we could do better. So in 2007, we began to build a new architecture for Australian schooling with the key features of transparency, accountability, measurement and investment in what counts. This investment has seen us provide $65 billion over 4 years, almost doubling the school education budget. And there were clear problems with the existing system. 8 different curricula, 8 teacher accreditation systems, and so on. And the decline in student performance that I've just mentioned, a warning to us as a country that the current approach to education and education funding was inadequate to the task. Some of these flaws in Australian education invited national solutions. Some required national leadership. And what was overdue was an all-encompassing education improvement framework in which schools, all schools, and students, all students, could flourish. We're also clear that schools should not resemble identical outlets of mass education, isolated from neighbourhoods. They should be unique, lively and fully engaged and integrated with their communities. At the same time, common, high-quality curriculum and outstanding teachers are identified as necessary in every school. Our answers are different to East Asia and different to Finland and Europe. They are specifically Australian responses because states and territories and school sectors run schools. And they run them well, and they should continue to have that purpose and that function. So any reform requires their close collaboration and their agreement. However, first up, transparency. Publicly accounting for public expenditure, I think, is self-evidently an important principle. But in education, this had an important further dimension, allowing a light to shine on schools, through my school, kick-started a debate about improvement. And for far too long, until we brought my school into being, we simply hadn't known what was happening in schools around Australia. Concurrently, we began the process of introducing a high-quality Australian curriculum which sets out a consistent approach to what students learn across the country. A curriculum is a common learning entitlement, a powerful cultural statement about who we are as a nation, but it should not be greatly different in remote far north Queensland than in the suburbs of this city. And just like the state's railroad tracks that eventually met seamlessly at the borders, we're now seeing an Australian curriculum rolling out across the country. Nor should the important steps in reform be compromised by the teachers in the classroom. And it is the case that the common thread that runs through the successful education systems of East Asia and Finland is teacher quality. And we've introduced significant reforms in this area. New minimum teacher training requirements, setting the bar higher in terms of entry levels to teaching. Introducing national professional standards for teachers and school principals. The teaching standards creating an opportunity to introduce merit pay. For the first time, old yearly salary progression systems are breaking down. And from next year, every teacher in the country will be entitled to effective performance management and support. And for some, it will be the first time this has ever happened. But getting this big picture right is only part of the task. We know that the hard work of education happens in the schools, and an Australian education system needs to be founded on quality schools. And our schools are filled with tertiary educated, creative individuals who can manage, organise and problem solve. But in too many cases, the formula, as we could call it, gets in the way of the better solution, the local solution. And I can say that the Western Australian government, through its independent public schools, have provided a conspicuous example of reform in this area. And we're working with state and territory governments to assist them in this process through our Empowering Local Schools reform. Commonwealth investment to allow schools to control more of their finances, their staffing, or their governance. And most states and territories and non-government sectors have enthusiastically embraced this initiative. We've introduced national partnerships with states and territories to improve the literacy and numeracy results of low SES students and raising the bar on teacher quality. And I can't stress enough that this is the first time that focused partnership investment in education, driven by the Commonwealth across all sectors, government and non-government, has taken place on this scale. And we've seen improvements in schools receiving funding under the Literacy and Numeracy National Partnerships, including in Year 3 reading, where 70% of schools improved, and in Year 5 numeracy, where 75% of schools improved. And I do note that education reforms in Western Australia are also showing dividends. 2011 was the best NAPLAN year ever for Western Australian schools. The state's cohort gains across 2009 to 2011 for years 3 to 5, 5 to 7 and 7 to 9 were higher than the Australian average cohort gains for all assessments. And in a result which Western Australia, I think, deserves particular congratulations, Indigenous students also made some important gains, with significant improvements in mean scores in reading, spelling, grammar and punctuation. That's good news. And there are other national reforms, national trade cadetships, computers in schools, trades training centres. In Western Australia alone, the Gillard Government has approved over $149 million to fund 42 trades training centre projects benefiting 142 schools. By term one this year, we'd installed more than 84,000 computers at 365 schools under the National Secondary School Computer Fund. And as you would be well aware, under the Building the Education Revolution, an investment of over $1.8 billion for nearly 3,000 projects at 1,065 schools in Western Australia. And pleasingly, all these BER projects have commenced and 99.5% are complete. As I said before, all these investments from our government have been sector blind, designed to benefit all Australian schools. And they're essential measures if we're to modernise our schools and prepare our students for work and life in a new century, a century that has been dubbed the Asian century. So we've constructed a new national education architecture that balances school empowerment with national standards. We've put design back into the system with robust, clearly articulated, long-term policies that we believe will bear fruit over the next decade. The final issue that draws together all the elements in our first wave of reform is a focus on student need and an effective funding system. A funding system that supports fairness, creativity, excellence and accountability. A funding system that is transparent, clearly understood and provides certainty across the sectors. We believe getting the funding right will provide the engine to drive future improvement. So to that end, in 2010, the first comprehensive review of school funding was commissioned, chaired by Sydney businessman Mr David Gonski, the first time since the Carmel report nearly 4 decades ago, a review of this size and importance. I have to say David Gonski and his team have done a terrific job. Western Australia was well represented, by the way, by Carmen Lawrence and Peter Tannick. Both of those names, I'm sure, are familiar to everybody here, both of them on the review panel. And that report, recently released, has been widely praised by education stakeholders. It's provided a platform we needed to have a national discussion, a mature national discussion, about how schools should be funded. And as you know, the review panel found that, and I quote, Australia lacks a logical, consistent and publicly transparent approach to funding schooling. We have to get this right if we're to address the slippage in international student performance I mentioned at the start of my address. And we have to get it right because the panel also found a significant deficiency in the education results of kids from disadvantaged backgrounds compared to those from better off backgrounds. The panel recommended a new funding model called a Schooling Resource Standard, another acronym coming up for you, or SRS. Under this system, schools would receive a base level of funding per student, calculated on the actual cost of delivering a great education at a sample of high-performing schools. Then there would be extra money to recognise schools and students where needs are higher and where the challenges are greater. These loadings would address issues including socio-economic advantage, indigeneity, remoteness, school size, disability, and support for students with limited English proficiency. The SRS funding model would allocate public education funding on the basis of school and student need. Now, we're taking the next steps carefully and methodically. We've got a tight work plan in place that will investigate and test the Gonski SRS model. The work plan was agreed by education ministers at a special ministerial council a fortnight ago, and in fact we meet again as education ministers here tomorrow in Perth. But this represented a significant step forward for us. I've established a ministerial schools funding reference group of all key stakeholders and state and territory governments. And state and territory and Catholic and independent sector representatives have been included in working groups to look at the various elements of Gonski's model: disability, indigeneity and the like. And our expectation is that stakeholders will remain committed to the task. States and territories are equal partners in this, and the Ministerial Council, which does meet in Perth tomorrow, will remain the key decision-making body under the Council of Australian Governments, acronym number 3, COAG. We're talking to parents, teachers, schools and communities across the country. The Prime Minister was here last night. Unfortunately, I got stuck in Darwin because the plane wouldn't take off. But we are having a national conversation on schooling at the same time as this work is being undertaken. And whilst we're strongly committed to the education reform journey, no decisions about a model and no funds have yet been committed. No decisions taken, no funds yet committed. And that's because there's still important work to be done. We need to look closely at the model, to test it out, to consult with stakeholders, to discuss it at Ministerial Council and COAG, and that was made explicit in the Gonski Review report, and I think it's the prudent way to address this reform. We need a model that we are confident will work, where the confidence is shared by stakeholders and governments, so for that reason, it's simply premature to be talking about the dollars. Any new system must meet our test that no school will lose $1 per student. Any new system must also be an improvement on the current situation. It must be fair, effective and sustainable. But we do believe this is a crucial component of genuine education reform, and I'm working towards having legislation introduced into the Australian Parliament this year. To conclude, it's a genuine pleasure and a privilege to give an address of this kind for an institute named after one of our greatest Prime Ministers, John Curtin. And it's especially pleasing to be able to talk about education in this place with you. Education's at the heart of the Labor mission. We understand the importance of education as reflected in John Curtin's experience. We believe in it as the great enabler, a passport out of poverty and personal circumstance, and we're very clear that our future prospects as a nation depend very much on the quality of the education all citizens have received. This government has led national school education reform. The effects will be with us for generations. So thank you very much for the opportunity to address you today.
Thanks very much, Minister. Don't usually do it this way. I usually do it standing up, and then I sort of walk off into the background and let the ministers keep standing, but we'll let you have a seat. And look, I'm happy to go back. I think everyone can see you anyway. It's okay. You're taller than me. So we have room for plenty of time for questions, and I'm sure there are many people here from all sectors. So have we got a question? I'm looking around to see who's our lucky number one question asker. Put your hand up, please, and we've got a roving microphone, so we need one over there. Here we go, table 17.
Peter, I've got 3 different questions. I'll ask one at a time and see if I've got time for the rest of them. Peter, I'm part of a group that owns 14 childcare centres across Australia. I view what we do as important. We're the people that lead these kids into schools. We're part of a very, very important cycle of their education. We own centres. We're opening one in the CBD of Perth in the next month or so. I also own a centre in Devonport in Tasmania, which is a very difficult socio-economic climate, so I see every part of it. I embrace what we're trying to do here in childcare and that education and all the rest of it. What I really worry about, though, is we're trying to build a Mercedes-Benz process here that a very few privileged people will end up with, but the big part of society will not be able to afford it. Now, I'm not saying the changes we're introducing are not good. We're passionate about changing. We're passionate about education. If you come and listen to if you've been around our board table for the last 6 years, that's all you hear. The kids, education, how do we improve what we do? We have a desire to be the best childcare providers here in Perth. I think we are. And I'll give a plug for Buggles Childcare if anybody's got kids out here.
Can I ask if you get your 3 questions out? We're lucky at one at the moment. Can we have one at least?
That's it.
Move on.
So I'm worried. Is there a recognition that this is getting expensive? And what are we doing? But I hear that, hey, listen, these changes are going to be a cup of coffee. That's rubbish. I'm the bloke who does the finance here, and I know it's costing us money. I know it's also important. Where's the government going and trying to support the people that I have at Devonport? The people at BHP, in CBD Perth, they can afford it. The people at Devonport, they cannot afford it. Those kids, though, are a mile better with what they're getting for us for a big percentage of their life.
Well, look, thank you very much for the question, and I certainly applaud your aspirations to provide the best possible quality childcare that you can to those parents and children that come to your centres. So congratulations on that effort. Perhaps just to say very quickly a couple of things. The first is that whilst my speech was specifically focusing on school education reform, the question by the gentleman highlights another area of significant reform that the government has undertaken, which is effectively a preschool education. For the first time, we have in place a national quality framework and an aspiration for universal access for children in the year before school. We now have a national regulator in terms of quality assurance and legislation to reflect the high goals that we've set for ourselves in the provision of quality childcare. And we recognise that there are going to be transition issues as we move to that higher quality of care. But it is a journey that is strongly fuelled by 2 specific factors. The first, that we know from the evidence that is given to us from our early childhood experts and others, that providing that high level of care is necessary and essential for them. And secondly, we also know that in terms of the schooling journey itself, the better prepared young people can be when they come into the school stream, the more capable they are of taking up the education opportunities that are there. Finally, to talk about the question of cost, we have a level of Commonwealth investment in early childcare on a scale, again, that we just simply haven't seen amongst previous governments of both political persuasions. We have a significant commitment. It's around $20 billion over 4 years. And of course, in terms of affordability, that includes the provision of both the childcare rebate and the childcare benefit. And of course, the rebate has been increased in terms of its quantum. We're providing something just shy of $1 billion for the universal access requirements to the states, as you know, sir, with an expectation that the states will prudently apply that investment so that the facilities are there for early childhood provision. And we're also providing some assistance in the education domain, and picking up on what we heard from the Vice-Chancellor a bit earlier, we provide some fee relief for people studying in that area, because you do have a requirement now for the provision of 15 hours per week over 40 weeks of the year in the year before the start of primary school, whether it's called kindy or foundation, with the provision of teaching by a university qualified teacher. So I think these reforms are absolutely necessary, and I think that they will provide us with immeasurable quantum benefits further down the track, because of course if we're able to provide this level of both high quality teaching and support and care and contain that and continue it into school, then we'll have much less issues around the criminal justice system, social welfare provisions and the like when people run through later into their life. I appreciate that you've got some challenges, confident that we've thought through the nature of this reform and absolutely committed to continuing both to listen to you but to work to the goals that we've set for ourselves.
Okay, our next question. Let's work over to the middle there. We've got one on table 16 and then one on table 8. There we go. Yep. Okay, if you can identify yourself as well, because that will help the minister be able to frame the answer.
Yep. Ed Black, Principal, Public School. A challenge for the minister tomorrow, that there's a view released that Gonski is just a plot to take over education by the federal government. Not that it comes from our state at all, Minister. I wonder your challenge tomorrow in meeting to talk to the states to see that it's not a plot but a partnership. As in public school, the importance of equity and the kids we look after is so crucial that to give us the tools, we'll do the job. But I think the partnership story is the crunch. And are you feeling confident about it, convincing states that this is a partnership to move forward?
Well, look, thank you for that question. Yes, I am confident that we will be able to work through these reforms as equal partners with the states. Both the Prime Minister and myself have reiterated now on a number of occasions that it is not neither the desire nor the intention of the Commonwealth to be running or administering state systems at all. State governments are responsible for their state education systems, as they ought to be. And generally I can say that across the jurisdictions they do that job well. There's always room for improvement and we're very keen to assist that. On the broader question of do we have the capacity as a ministerial council and within the Federation around what's loosely termed or was termed previously cooperative federalism, now it's got a couple of other different names. I guess I just make this concluding point. When I came into this position I was told that we would not reach agreement on a national curriculum, that we would not reach agreement on national teacher qualifications and standards, and that we would not be able to, as a country, chart a future course on reform in education. All of that has proved to be completely wrong. State education ministers of a variety of political hues bring the interests of their schools and their students to the table and agree reforms which are not only in their interest but also in the national interest. And I believe we can do the same thing with the Gonski recommendations.
Thanks. There's someone on table 8, I think, just in front, this lady here. Just there.
Hi, Grace Oakley from University of Western Australia. As a musician, you'd appreciate that you can't get good at anything without practice. We have a lot of problems, and you've probably heard this a million times before, getting our trainee teachers into schools to do prac. We never have enough prac placements. It's a huge challenge. The national professional standards do state that, you know, the teachers at the 2 higher levels will mentor pre-service teachers, but I'm just wondering if that's going to be enough. Do you have a response to that issue?
Well, I agree that it's an issue that does come up quite a bit in feedback from existing practitioners, education academics and teachers. And my response to it is to encourage state education ministers, directors general and those who run the system to be aware of it. It's a real issue. It does need to be addressed. I think there are opportunities for it to be effectively addressed in the considerations that the Ministerial Council is making tomorrow around the question of national teacher standards and quality.
Okay. We're back. I'm trying to give this side of the room a chance, but table 16's keen, so table 16, if you put your hand up, you know.
I'm glad I wasn't sitting at that table for lunch.
The world's run by people who turn up, so table 16's turned up.
Thank you. Claire Howard from the State School Teachers Union. We welcome the commentary that you're making about further equity for students from the federal level. However, we've got some real concerns regarding the positions that the federal government continues to push in particularly two areas. The first, teacher bonuses. The second, the IPS model.
Sorry, what was the second?
The IPS model, the Independent Public Sector School model. Yeah, the IPS model. The IPS model, which is well recognised to be a replica of those processes that have been followed in other states and territories throughout the world, particularly the United States, has at this point in time not demonstrated any results for improvement for students. The data is fairly clear in that what it's shown has been a separation of students attending schools and also a reduction in teacher conditions. Further to that, the review that is in place now for the IPS from Western Australia has not yet actually taken place. The first report is was supposed to be due this year, with a further review at the end of 2013. Can you therefore explain, Minister, why it is that the federal government have considered the supporting of this model when there isn't the evidence to give it credibility?
Well, let me just address those questions quickly, and then I'll come back to the substantial matter about evidence. On the question of teacher bonuses, we do believe that it is appropriate to provide a recognition for teachers who achieve on a voluntary basis under the proposed the existing national standards at either a highly accomplished or lead level and an additional one-off payment. The Commonwealth is not in the business of engaging in nor seeking to participate in any way in the setting of industrial arrangements, salaries and conditions, staff arrangements or the like. That is properly the province of state education systems and the independent sector systems who run their schools, and it should remain that way. But I do believe that we have struck what I think is an appropriate balance between recognising both the collegiate nature of the teaching profession and also the opportunity that teachers hitherto have not had generally to be able to consider how they might be a more effective teacher or be recognised as one, and thus share that expertise with others. And I see this as being a very powerful tool for improving teacher quality, and I'm very pleased at the response that we've seen generally from academic education thinkers and practitioners in the school system more broadly. And as you know, we did calibrate this particular election commitment to take into account how it might best fit with the national qualifications and standards that we want to have in place. On the question of independent public schools, there'll be many people in this room who have a more intimate connection with the IPSs than I do, but I want to make 2 points. The first is that, again, reforms that we are encouraging at the Commonwealth level around providing greater autonomy for school leaders in the school setting, as is the case with independent schools, are not intended to, nor should they be construed as, nor enable a diminution of the appropriate remuneration for teachers under various awards, regulations and the like. I'm a strong supporter of the teaching profession. Are teachers underpaid or overpaid? Well, I think they need to be fairly remunerated, and there's no question about that is important, but it's not linked in directly to the support that we're providing on school autonomy. I look forward to seeing the review on the independent public schools. I have to say that I have found in the visits that I have had to the independent public schools good teaching practice, student populations that are performing well. And certainly in some of the larger schools, the opportunity for the school leader, the principal, to make what I think are entirely appropriate decisions around the management and organisation of the school day, deployment of resources within the school setting and the like. It is an important challenge to consider the overall impact of a policy of this kind in relation to the way in which kids in all government schools are progressing. I think that's an absolutely legitimate point that you raise, so I look forward to seeing that review as well.
Okay. We've got a question here. I'm still looking for this side of the room, but you guys are failing at the moment, so over here.
Thank you, Minister. And as a member of a board of an independent public school, I can certainly say that the experience of the school community, of which I'm a part in that role, took that opportunity up because, and I think we need to think about where that demand is coming from. I think there's clearly a frustration in some school communities that some of the rigidities that they encounter in the administration of education were frustrating some of the decisions that they wanted to make to get the best out of their local school community. I wanted to say that I think a missing voice and a missing partner in what I've heard of the conversation around the future of school funding and improving experience and outcomes has been the voices of parents. And I think, other than talking about my school, I don't think we emphasise that role and that opportunity enough. I hear lots of stories from parents of kids with disabilities who work with some great schools and some great teachers. And as a parent myself, I wonder how it is that parents who find themselves looking at a My School website and learning that their school is not performing might think to themselves, well, where do I go from here if I'm not in a position to choose a different school, to move to a different location, particularly as the issue of local intake schools becomes difficult. A real gap, and I commend the role of teachers in progressing these reforms, but a real gap in the education system seems to me to be advocacy for parents. If you've got a school community that you're part of that you can comfortably go to your principal or your teacher and take up some of those issues, that's wonderful. But the experience of many parents, particularly of kids who don't fit in that middle bell curve where our education system does the best work, where do those parents go to access support, not just information, because information alone isn't enough. People need, as families to make choices, need some support and skills development to help them work as partners in education reform. And if you could comment on that, please, Minister.
Well, look, thank you for that question. I guess the first thing to say is that I do believe that parents, through their constituent state and national parent bodies, have ample opportunity to make representations to me as Minister, and as I'm sure you'd be aware, they do that, and I do listen very carefully to them. I think I understand, as a parent who had 3 kids go through the school system, and I've got 2 still in higher education, I have a great interest in how their education's travelling as well. And my expectation is, in the Gonski reform process that I've just outlined to you here, that those parents' organisations which do have access to the forums will make the views of parents well known, and they'll certainly be listened to. The second thing to say about the question of parents with disabilities, yes, I get it, and you're right. It's highly frustrating for a certain cohort of parents who have kids, not necessarily, and I was talking about this a little earlier with the principal when I came into Perth this morning, finally, that there are kids that will present at schools who have an identifiable disability, and the parent will be very frustrated that the provision of support and appropriate opportunities for teaching for the kid and for learning for the kid are not to the level that they expect. Just to very quickly say that we recognised that this is an important issue for parents. We provided an extra $200 million in the last budget in order for us to provide some additional support across the states and across the sectors. And I won't go into the detail of it here because I know that we'll run out of time. But that was done in recognition of the fact that this is a serious issue for a number of parents, and we hear from them. And there is a special parent group and others who have a concern about disability who provides us with advice as well. Finally, just to say that there is a working group that looks specifically at this issue as a consequence of the Gonski recommendations, because again, disability was one of the identified barriers to kids achieving their full potential. My colleague, Senator Jacinta Collins, chairs that committee. She'd be very pleased to have representations from yourself and from others. This is a difficult piece of work, there's no doubt about it, but we recognise the scale and seriousness of the issue, and we're committed to doing something about it. And just finally, around the agenda for school empowerment, where we are investing significant funds in supporting states and school systems, it is specifically contemplated that amongst those other issues of greater autonomy are included a greater provision and opportunity for parents, P&Cs, participation in boards and the like to take place.
Thanks. There's a question down here on table 3.
Hi Peter, Paul Papalia, Shadow Minister for Education. Before I ask a question again about independent public schools, just preface it by saying that I'm neutral on that. I don't actually yet have a view with regard to their success or otherwise. I welcome your observation that any analysis of the success of IPS must include the impact on non-IPS schools and the rest of the system. And to that end, I would ask, is it your view that ultimately we identify the benefits of IPS and provide them to every school in the system? Or is it your view that that may not physically be possible and we have to come up with some other solution?
Thanks for the question, Paul, and it's something that I very much hope you may have the opportunity to chew on at some stage too. Look, I think with the IPS schools, we're at an early period of reform around autonomy and greater decision-making opportunities for school leaders. And it's a cliche for me to say that A, one size doesn't fit all, and B, there will be different jurisdictional and regional circumstances that attach to schools and the desirability that they may feel to take that step. I'm not trying to duck the question, but I don't think we know the answer to that yet. And that's what's exciting about it. But I respond to what the parent said earlier. It is the case, and some who specialise in this area will know this, that the research tends to suggest that greater degrees of school autonomy will lead to better student performance. Now, I think as we work through that, whether it's in Western Australia with their independent public schools model, or whether it's in other states which are looking at autonomy across a continuum, we have to judge and evaluate, firstly, whether that is being delivered at all, and in this case where you already have a number of schools that have taken the IPS route, whether in fact you're seeing an overall potential increase in opportunity for students and education results. Final comment. There's a huge difference between a small school, say for example in a peri-urban area or in a regional or rural area, which is drawing a number of kids from lower socio-economic backgrounds, and a school, say for example, in a Perth suburb, drawing a student population from middle or higher socio-economic backgrounds, in terms of the capacity that the leadership of that school has to utilise the capacities that exist within the school community, including the parent community. So it is very much a case of both those who run the education system, school leaders and the communities themselves coming to agreement about how they want to advance and embrace this particular reform. Now here in Western Australia, whilst there's conjecture and debate around the matters that have come off the floor in the questions and your question too, Paul, to me, I think the answer is that you're on that journey, and so are many other schools around Australia in different guises. And now, fortunately, we have an opportunity of assessing whether the journey is a successful one through things like NAPLAN and otherwise. And again, when the review that was referred to in the earlier question arrives, a better answer, or a more thorough, I guess, answer about the desirability, the impact, and the effect that may be happening on non-IPS schools can be given.
While we wait for one more question from the floor, I was going to ask, going back to the Gonski review, you mentioned the consultation process that will now occur. Is the aim to try and have the 2013 budget, federal budget, implementing some of the outcomes from the Gonski review in terms of funding? Because you did mention funding. It's not about funding now, but obviously at some stage it's going to be, and I know there's a lot of representatives here from various different school types. Is the plan for the 2013 budget to basically have funding in it?
John, the answer to that is similar to the answer that I gave when we had this discussion at the table before. I'm not talking about upcoming budgets in relation to the funding review and models. And in fact, I won't be talking about it at all until we have agreed a model. And the reason for that is that is the first order business that we have in front of us. And I am convinced that the most prudent way of going through a debate which has derailed politicians and political parties in the past is to take that approach.
Sure. Okay, we've got one more question, and it has to be extremely quick. Where's our microphone? It's there. Okay, but it has to be a quick one over there on table 17 because we've only got a minute. So a quick question and a quick answer. Thank you.
My question revolves around P&Cs and how they operate, and the corporate governance between the operating models and the standardisation, I guess, through WAXO. We've seen an increasing number of incidences, I guess, if I call it that, between how P&Cs operate and the school systems, and there's tension is probably the word I would use, between some of the school systems and how and what the expectations of P&Cs are. The Gonski report, I'm sorry, I haven't read it in its full in depth and breadth, but
it's
doesn't
silent
touch
on that matter.
Yeah, it doesn't touch on that, but we've certainly got some issues here in WA on how P&Cs are perceived and the tension between that and the school system. Would you like to elaborate on that and please give us some insight?
Mr Gonski's panel didn't directly consider this matter. We have a view, generally, as a national government, that the views and the voices of parents both should be heard and deserve to be heard, and that parents are clearly extremely important stakeholders in the education of their children. We recognise that there are a range of sometimes complex issues around the relationships between P&Cs and specific schools, and sometimes with school systems as well. And we encourage, again, recognising the diversity of the education system that we do have, the relevant authorities, principals and others to speak openly and work through issues that may be of concern. Just to finish, in case it does sound a little bit like a generalisation, I was asked a question earlier on about what recourse does somebody have if they go to the My School website and they find that the school in their local community that they're thinking of sending their kids to isn't performing as well as a similar school, because remember, My School really only looks at similar schools by way of comparison. And of course the answer to that is for the parent to interact with the school itself, with the principal and the teachers in the school. And I'm very confident that if it's an open and thorough interaction entered into in good faith, then in the vast majority of cases, people are satisfied with both what they hear by way of response to issues that they raise, and also that the school itself is better informed about the views of parents that are thinking of sending their kids there and what they might do. The days in which what happened when your child went into the classroom and came out the other end and what the school was doing, you could only really glean from a conversation in the tuck shop or getting it out of your kid when they came home, are over. Which for those of us that have had adolescents isn't probably a bad thing, because sometimes you don't get a lot of information when you ask the questions, especially of boys. I know. I don't have boys, but I know that. So we're at a really exciting point where even on issues which have got a little bit of edge to them and where there may be different views, we've got more information in front of us, more transparency, more understanding, and frankly, a very strong commitment to improve all schools as, if you like, the foundations for that discussion. So I encourage it to continue fruitfully.
Thanks. Well, look, before I formally give a vote of thanks to the Minister, I'd just like to say thank you to those who helped organise today's lunch, the whole event in fact. Some of you might be aware we had to be quite flexible and nimble in putting on today's lunch and the preceding panel discussion, so I would like to take the opportunity to thank Liz Ritchie, Elizabeth McLaughlin and the CEDA team for their understanding and cooperation in working with our institute in putting on the event. And thanks also to the panel members for being for their contributions and for being so flexible and understanding in your making your arrangements. And at our end of the JCIPP, thank you also to Lisa Duplock for all her help in organising the event, and of course to the staff of the Hyatt Regency. And now, on behalf of everybody here, Minister, I would like to thank our Speaker. As the Minister said, the school funding system has been left unexamined for far too long. I think 40 years is what we were talking about. So I think the government should be congratulated for putting it on the public policy agenda, no matter what side of the debate you might be on or where it ends up, because at least it's now being discussed. And I'm sure we're now much better informed about that issue, but also many other issues on the education and the schools education front. So on behalf of everybody, I'd like you to join with me in thanking the Minister. Oh, wait 1 second. And I'd like to now call on Liz Ritchie, who's the Director of CEDA in WA, just to conclude with a few words. Thanks, Liz.
Thank you and good afternoon. My name is Liz Ritchie and I'm the State Director of WA. For those who joined us at lunchtime, thank you to you all. What an outstanding session, I have to say. As I opened this morning, I mentioned that this was going to be a very special event, and I think it was all that and more. And this is due to the expertise of today's panellists and the Speaker and to the Minister, of course, but also to you. The calibre of the attendance here today is wonderful, and we thank you very much for giving of your time and participating here today, and to, of course, the discussions and questions that we've received. So thank you very much. Those who were here this morning enjoyed the three different perspectives from our panellists, Ben, Alec and Tanya, and I again thank you, and thank you for your time and being flexible with today's program. Also to thank the Minister, who's outlined comprehensively the school's education reform. We look forward to seeing you again here in WA. Thank you, Minister. I'd also like to acknowledge and thank John and his team, Curtin University and the John Curtin Institute of Public Policy. I think we'd all agree it's been a wonderful collaboration, so thank you. And to our chair today, Dr. Penny Flett, thank you very much for stepping in. Finally, just a quick thank you to my team. These events don't happen without the work of the exceptional team that are with me here in the CEDA in WA, and that is to Alana, Alicia, and of course to Elizabeth McLaughlin, who is today's event coordinator, so thank you. And just on a very final note, a quick plug for CEDA. We can't miss these opportunities. We're very proud of the program that we've put together for the rest of the year and beyond. And just a couple of things I would like to mention. It's timely that we're about to launch the Copeland Emerging Leaders Program, and we do this very proudly in partnership with Curtin University this year for the first time here in WA. The Copeland program has been running for 10 years over in the eastern states. It's an incredible leadership program, so I encourage each of you to take a moment to look at that. As it's launched, it's going to be on our website as of tomorrow, and it will be applications will be accepted as of tomorrow, and the program will begin at the end of May. So I urge you to take a quick glance at that. And as I have a room of education experts, I think it's also timely to advertise a program that we're going to be running in September. We're very pleased. It's called the Higher Education: How Can Australia Remain Internationally Competitive? A very critical issue, and we are delighted to have each of the Vice-Chancellors from all of the 5 universities joining us on a panel for this forum on the 25th of September, along with one of the panel members of the Base Funding Review, Professor Louise Watson. So certainly a wonderful event to look out for. Thank you very much and enjoy the rest of your afternoon.